Before rewatching Mirrors, I was a little confused as to why it's either forgotten or honestly kinda hated on. It was one of those movies that I saw in theaters when it came out, and then have a clear memory of when it came to my Blockbuster for rent. It's got a fun cast of reliables and was directed by one of the early 2000s freshest and goriest directors. That director has gone on to have a steady and varied career, and his new movie starring Halle Berry called Never Let Go sounds as intriguing as ever. After watching Mirrors again, I still really enjoyed it, but now I understand why it has the reputation it does, and why it's perfect for a black sheep. Let's take a look, but maybe be wary of any mirrors that don't look exactly right.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
When I was rewatching this for its defense, I was thinking to myself that the movie has a very unique feel. It's like a Fulci supernatural Italian horror movie with its backbone story of an Asian ghost movie, directed through the lens of a French New Extreme director. Lo and behold, all of my years of devotion to the art of exploring all that is horror led me to a somewhat true conclusion. The movie is co-written and directed by Alexandre Aja, who is one of the most successful newer French directors that has also made the leap across the pond into a nice career doing movies for a more global audience. When doing the research, I found that Mirrors was co-written by frequent Aja collaborator Gregory Lavasseur, but there was also another credit from a man named Sung Ho Kim. That led me to his IMDb page and the discovery that Mirrors is actually a remake of a South Korean movie called Into the Mirror from 2003. That movie did well, and Aja himself has had success with remakes, having done an excellent job with his ultra-violent take on The Hills Have Eyes. Now, I had gone through a whole phase of watching as much J-horror as I could, but I hadn't really dipped my toe that deep into the Korean entries yet, so I get why I missed it. It's actually refreshing when Hollywood decides to remake a movie from somewhere else rather than something American audience has already seen and probably not even needed. Looking at the cast and crew, it's a solid group. Aja helped write and direct things like High Tension, Hills Have Eyes remake, and today's movie, but he's also excelled as just either or. He only wrote P2 and the Maniac remake, and was a hired gun on movies like Piranha 3D, Horns, Oxygen, and Crawl. His frequent writing partner, Greg Lavasseur, also helped out writing many of Aja's early hits, and even got a shot at directing with the pretty fun found footage horror flick, The Pyramid. The cast does its part well too. Kiefer Sutherland came back to horror for the first time in 15 years after he played a part in another American remake with The Vanishing. Of course, he's also in one of the greatest vampire flicks of all time, The Lost Boys, and in the underrated Flatliners. Elsewhere, we have newer faces like Amy Smart and Paula Patton, as well as reliable character actors like Jason Flemyng and Julian Glover. Glover has chosen the wrong Grail, fought in Star Wars, appeared with James Bond and Harry Potter, and been in one of the biggest TV shows of all time. For horror, though, he's dodged the genre apart from Hammer's Quatermass experiment, but that leans more into sci-fi anyway. Flemyng has been in a lot more horror, with my favorites being Deep Rising and From Hell. Patton is great in any genre, but to date, this is her only horror, and Smart has been around forever with other horrors like Butterfly Effect, Campfire Tales, and Strangeland to her name. The movie follows a haunted, burned-out old department store, and we see the current night watchman. He doesn't stay employed or alive for very long though, and we are treated to the first of many great death scenes. He's obviously scared, but then suddenly his reflection isn't, and it uses the piece of mirror that he had in his hand to slice his throat. It's pretty gory and feels very visceral on screen, which is something audiences have definitely grown accustomed to seeing from the director's other movies. Something that is a little different is the length of the movie, however, and it's to the film's detriment. At an hour and 51 minutes, one of the few complaints I have for the movie is that it can feel a little overlong. It's not like the brisk and explosive violence that the French New Extremity brought, and while a lot of Asian horror have longer run times, they also have much more nuance than what we see here. The movie shows its main conceit right from the beginning, and that's not necessarily a bad thing either. Lots of great horror movies show exactly what you're getting into from the beginning and still hold our attention the whole way through. We get that here too. Not only does it show the mirror monster gimmick, but gives us a credit sequence that, when you think about it, really isn't that surprising. Not surprising, sure, but it's pretty neat with its mirrored effects. The movie gives us the backstory of the characters in a way that brings us into what feels like the middle of a chapter. Something happened to Sutherland's Ben when he was a cop, and now he is a security guard at the same place we just watched a dude die at. He's also in the middle of a divorce and has that stress of trying to take care of his kids. Some of what he goes through is supposed to be seen as possibly in his head, though, as he's stressed and taking some medications too. The movie does follow a few of the tropes we came to expect of movies of this time, with jump scares and loud sound cues. But the visuals that accompany those usually are better than the sounds and execution they're given. Ben sees a lot of strange things at his work and ends up bringing them home, even seeing his own face contort in the mirror, with his sister, played by Smart, assuming it's just everything he's going through starting to break him. He's still a good cop though, and uses some of his old resources and instincts to investigate what could possibly be going on. He even goes to his estranged wife's work to get her to give him information on the man's death. Unfortunately, the case ends up having real stakes when it starts going directly after his family. His sister gets an even grislier death than the guy we saw at the start from the movie. While the CGI isn't great, as all CGI can be hit or miss, the practical inserts and the horror of what we're actually seeing more than makes up for it. Unfortunately, at a little less than an hour in, there hasn't been a lot of action to this point, and we still have more than halfway of the runtime to go. The length and speed of how the movie tells its story really is my only gripe here, and the rest of it's really strong. It's got an interesting story, cool effects, and stands out as one of the better late 2000s horror movies. A lot of the movies from 2005 to 2010 just didn't have the oomph or punch that they could have used, and Mirrors is not afraid to make sacrifices to characters or have consequences and dour outcomes. The second story of the movie starts, and Ben goes deeper into why the building was burned down and even gets a hint from the mirrors. He watches video of the man who tried to burn down the building before he died in an insane asylum, and again, the makeup's great here. The dude is genuinely hard to look at. You feel for Ben throughout, and while Kiefer may feel like he's sleepwalking through the first part of the movie, as soon as his sister is killed and he has no leads on how to find and end the Mirror's reign of terror, he goes into full-on defense mode out of fear for his family. Of course, he makes things worse by looking even crazier than he already did.
You crazy?
But eventually finds out what he has to do by discovering that the department store was built on top of an old asylum and that a young patient there was caught up in something of a possession. He finds her in a mirrorless monastery and drags her back to the place where she got the demon out of her and into the mirrors. They are able to reverse this process and get the demon back in Anna, where he then kills her by blowing up a huge portion of the building. Unfortunately, we learn in one of the coolest reveals of the 2000s that Ben didn't make it out either. He saved his family but died in the explosion, and notices that when he walks outside, not only does nobody notice him, but also that all writing is backwards. He is dead and stuck in the mirror world. With great practical effects and a killer ending, Mirror was a shot in the arm for late 2000s horror. I do see why it falls to the wayside, as it was sort of the start of a forgotten period by Aja. He came out hot with High Tension coming out overseas as an introduction to the man, and made a better version of a 70s flick by one of our most beloved horror kings. After this, he would get a fun failure in Piranha 3D and a forgotten adaptation in Horns, and even though his screenplay for Maniac is inspired, this is seen as much more of an Elijah Wood vehicle, even if its gore and just flat-out mean attitude is in line with the director. He would have a couple others, but Crawl would bring him back fully and really be one of his best works. While the movie was a moderate success, making $78 million on its $35 million budget, it was absolutely wrecked by critics, and a Christy Carlson Romano-led direct-to-video sequel didn't help its reputation. Give Mirrors a look and relish in what it is rather than focusing on what it isn't.